Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. I'm Lawrence Brown and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to things and stuff. Specifically, things and stuff that one country does better than the other. And as somebody who's lived extensively in both countries, I am perhaps more primed than most people to give my verdict on it. Basically, this is going to be a straightforward video for which my team has concocted a list of categories, or as they say here in the United States, categories. And controversially, my job is to tell you which country does that thing best. Knowing that my hot takes will likely lose me 1,000 subscribers. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, do that now! In the meantime, who does it better, Britain or America? First category, welcoming visitors. I don't know that there's any country on earth that has absolutely perfected this, but as someone who's been a visitor to both countries, I suppose this is quite hard to decide. It's also made harder by the fact that airports are not particularly welcoming places. So I think this has to be judged once you've got in the taxi. And for the most part, Americans are very welcoming. Sometimes that is with a painted smile, whereas in Britain, those smiles tend to look less worked on. But I would say on the whole, I felt equally welcome in either country, so this one's a tie. Signage is probably a big part of feeling welcome or not welcome in another country, because if it's not any good, you'll feel lost, which is probably why this book that I discovered at San Francisco Airport feels very apt. But on the whole, I've had good and bad experiences in either country. In America, specifically here in Chicago, signage can be bad when you're trying to cross a street downtown, because sometimes you'll have Google Maps with you, but the roads won't be labelled on the other side of the road, so you don't know what road it is, and you have to look at the other roads to find out what road that is, and then sometimes that's not clear, and you don't know which intersection you're at. On the other hand, back in Britain, a problem that's very common that I think is a little less common in America, signage on the front of establishments often don't know where to put an apostrophe. So while I'm sure 95% of the time both countries have good signage, it's the bad signage that sticks out to me, and in equal terms. So again, without wishing to sit on the fence, I would say this one is also a tie. Public transport. I think anybody who's ever watched my channel before might have an inclination as to which way this is going to go. I think Britain, while not even being the best in Europe for public transport, is still pound for pound more reliable than its American equivalent. Now don't get me wrong, when I was in San Francisco last week, I absolutely love their trams. In Chicago, I love the L train when Chainsaw Jim isn't on board. But here's what America's lacking: a more comprehensive nationwide train network. Buses in some cities that show up on a regular basis. And good long distance buses, because Greyhound, whereas Britain has a more reliable and robust transport infrastructure, so I will go with Britain. Walkability, which is quite hard to generalise, especially given the size of the United States. But despite the fact that Britain's public transport is superior, it is also more walkable, because obviously in America there's a big reliance on cars. So a lot of American cities, Chicago being a fine example, built massive suburbs that expanded way beyond the actual city. And sometimes this is so far out that walking is just not a viable option. In Britain, everything's squished together more and often within walking distance. So it's not unusual for somebody to walk to the post office or the chip shop or the pub. Whereas in America, walking is much further down the list when it comes to everyday mobility. So going into a 4-2 lead, Britain wins the walkability category for my money. Beaches. This is going to be a hard one because I have some very fond memories of British beaches. Those in the southwest are particularly stunning during the summer months. On the other hand, the beach in Brighton is made of pebbles. I also grew up near a beach, even though it was often laden with used Durex products. Whereas in America, you know what? The beaches that I've seen tend to be quite clean. And because it's got an absolutely gigantic coastline, I think there's just a greater diversity of beaches, many of which I've not visited. But I have been to a beach on the West Coast, the Great Lakes, Florida, and up in Maine, and I've always found them to be nice and well kept, and sometimes the bearer of a beautiful sunset. So on this score, I'm going to have to give the edge to America. Who has the best countryside? This is a tough one to pick. I think America has a greater diversity of how countryside might look, depending on where you are in the country. And sometimes, like when I went out to West Virginia, the countryside is absolutely beautiful and rolling. On the other hand, while driving through the entire state of Indiana, sometimes the most interesting thing for 300 miles is a barn house. Whereas on the occasions that I visited Britain in the last few years, the countryside in its green splendour did something to me as it passed by the train, or as the train past it, physics was not my strong point. I think it was nostalgia, but it was also affirmation of my love of the colour green. In fact, when I think of Britain, my first thought is the greenliness of the countryside. And so I have no choice but to restore Britain's 2-point lead. Now, the reverse of that, city life. Who does it better? And given the vast amounts of cities in both countries, this puts me in a difficult spot. I've never been bored in Liverpool, Manchester, or London. The same is true in Chicago, or San Francisco, or New York City. I think with this, I'm going to have to let my emotions guide me and go back to a comment that I made in a video not too long ago, in which I said, sometimes when I'm walking down a street in Chicago, I just look around myself and go, oh my gosh, I live in America. And I think that feeling is particularly strong in a city because you have so many visual markers of its Americanness. And this probably just plays into my childhood obsession with America. But sometimes with those huge skyscrapers and blinking lights, I feel like I'm in a movie, and it's not altogether a bad feeling. So controversially, I'm going to go with American cities. But there's a lot more to unpack with that, so maybe there's a future video in my brain. Film and television. I think it depends on which of those words we're talking about as to who wins. If it's film, America wins hands down. In fact, most of the films that I watched growing up in Britain were most likely American films. Wizard of Oz, Back to the Future, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and one criminally overlooked by the Academy, Herbie Rides Again. On the other hand, while there has been some absolutely excellent American television, I grew up more so on British stuff, which I kind of prefer for a number of reasons. Number one, our TV shows tend not to be as loud. And if it's BBC stuff, you don't have any ads, never mind an ad every 5 minutes. And I like the fact that on British television, a lot of the characters look like real people, as opposed to looking like they came straight from a modelling shoot. So for me, Britain gets the edge on television, meaning that film and television is a tie. And I've teamed up with BritBox to make it easier for you to see your British favourites yourself. And their latest 4-part miniseries is about the English-born American film star Cary Grant.
What accent you got, kid?
English.
Archie, starring Jason Isaacs in the title role, Grant's real name was Archibald Leach, is an intriguing portrayal of the star's life that includes plenty of cameos from other stars from the golden age of cinema. And if my world-renowned humour ever gets too much, why not indulge in some dramatic relief by checking out other new dramas like Blue Lights and Three Little Birds. You can stream your other favourite British shows via your smartphone, tablet, desktop, Chromecast, Apple TV or Roku device, as well as LG and Samsung smart TVs. Head to BritBox.com/LostInThePond and use the promo code LostInThePond when signing up for a monthly subscription, and you'll get 50% off your first month. The link is also in my description below. Parks. How do you decide which country has the best parks? Because mostly I hate parks, whether that's municipal parks, theme parks, or national parks. It's like, ooh, I have to share this space with other humans and children. Which is why I like big parks, because all of the crowds are more spread out. St James's Park in London is one such place, although I do have a vague memory of being attacked there by ducks. On the other hand, America has bigger parks and a smaller population density than the UK. So for example, when I visited the Benjamin Harrison State Park in Indiana, it almost felt like I was walking through the apocalypse but with nice trees. And as much as British people love the Lake District or the Peak District or the Cairngorms, they can't hold a candle to America's national parks. This is the country that came up with the idea in the first place. And when Alaska has 2 national parks that are larger not just than Snowdonia National Park in Wales, but also Wales, you know that the number of people per square mile will be smaller. So for my money, America's parks come with slightly more perks. Architecture, now that's right up my street, literally. I'm a big fan of buildings and design. And Britain has centuries worth of architecture and takes the preservation of it very seriously. America, on the other hand, doesn't so much. It is very telling that when you watch a controlled demolition video on YouTube, the location is more often than not the United States. And yet, I am a big sucker for brutalism and tall buildings. And Chicago has plenty of that. In fact, it has a plethora of architectural styles, including not just brutalism, but Art Deco and new shit. And I like it. I like what it does to me. It makes me feel like I should be a photographer who slings webs for a living. And so even though I have huge respect for stupidly old English minsters, I like the look of American city skylines. And also some of the housing styles, including colonial style houses, or other ones that I see around Chicago, like the Queen Anne style. Or, quite particular to Chicago, the Greystone. So for the first time in as many days, the United States of America has gone into the lead. But with this category, I dare say that America's chances of victory just took a major blow to the arse, because the American healthcare system is completely and utterly a little bit silly. And I don't just mean that from the point of view of the individual cost, but also, and I don't think people talk about this enough, how convoluted it is. And I first saw signs of this when I signed up for my first health insurance, when it started saying things like, you'll need to pay a deductible for this or a copay for that. I don't know what any of those words mean. And that particular confusion was born out of the fact that in Britain, this scenario wouldn't even exist. Sure, we pay contributions to national health insurance, but after that, everything's covered by the National Health Service, which I miss. And so because of that, I make the scorecard Britain 7, the United States 7. Ah yes, food, the source of our delight and many of our healthcare problems. But which country generally does food better? Well, this is a bloody hard one to answer, but I'm going to go with my intuition on this. You know, people often say to me, like I can do anything about it, that, ooh, British food is bland. Firstly, you don't know about the joys of a sausage roll, or of Yorkshire puddings, or of fish and or chips. I love British food, and if the saying is true that you are what you eat, I am 67% British food myself, but only because most of my life was spent there so far. Because American food continues to broaden my horizons and waistline. Because perhaps just as good as Old England's fish and chips is New England's clam chowder. And you've had the joy of watching me try for the first time a Philly cheesesteak.
Oh, that is really good. That is really good. No, I take it all back. Cheese Whiz is my new hero.
And what rhymes with cheesesteak? Sea snake, but also cheesecake. I do love a good American cheesecake. Why am I Welsh? And I try to think of it like this. I miss a lot of British foods. But one day, if I ever leave America, will I miss more American foods than I do British ones? And I think due to the American variety, the answer to that is yes. And so even though I didn't even remotely believe this before moving to the United States, I think it has the better food. And so we're down to the final category with America in a 1-point lead. And my British subscribers are thinking, come on Lawrence, American chocolate is bland. Don't you try to hoodwink us for the sake of tension and clicks. But that's not what I'm doing, because when you live in America for more than a decade, you start to see beyond the usual stereotypes. And this includes their chocolate. They find different ways to work in peanut butter, something that most Brits wouldn't even think to do. That said, I often think of the chocolate I left behind in Britain, because British chocolate, like Crunches or Twirls or the Curly Whirly, were the candy of my childhood. And when it comes to chocolate, you can't beat nostalgia. So, apologies America, on this one, I'm gonna go with Britain. British chocolate might not be the best in the world, but it's the best in mine. And so, what do you know? It's a tie. And already I can hear my American subscribers going, ooh, Lawrence, of course you would make this a tie. You're a fan of soccer in which nobody ever wins. Okay, so America prefers it when someone, i.e. America, wins. So, in that spirit, let's do a tiebreaker. And that tiebreaker question, plucked from the top of my head, is this. Which of the two countries has a better Windsor Castle? Wait, no, I'm being told that's biased. So, in the interest of an alternative, which country has won more World Series than any other? Right. I'm not very good at this. In that case, it's a tie. So well done to both countries for equally outdoing the other. And before I go, if you like the work I do here on Lost in the Pond and would like to give me most of your money so that I can make this channel better and live a cushy life, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Alternatively, if you don't want to click away from this site but still want to support me in the same way, then become a member of Lost in the Pond by clicking the join button below. Until the next video. Goodbye.